Kurt, we're so honoured to have you here with us today. Our sincere thanks for agreeing to talk to us, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say. You've already shared your screen, so you're ready. You're way to go. Thank you.
You're already good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Okay, my name is Kurt Wilkinson, and this is going to be a presentation on my garden, Yalamurra garden. Oh, whoops. All right, so where am I? I'm in South Australia, which is I'm in Adelaide, South Australia, which is the very south central part of Australia. And it is, surprisingly, it is a Mediterranean climate. Obviously, that's why I'm here. Very, very dry summers and very mild winters. We get a little bit of frost where I am, but not a great deal. And the reason why it is so dry is because even though I've got the Great Australian Bight, above that in that landmass is a very, very large desert. And that's why as the weather comes across from the west, it just doesn't pick up very much moisture. And so when we come into summer, the relative humidity is very, very low. And so if we look at humidity in Adelaide as a comparison, relative humidity is about 35% in Adelaide. It is 50% in Athens. It is 56% in Melbourne, 60% in Lisbon, and 65% in San Francisco. So these are all Mediterranean climates, but there is a hierarchy, and I would suggest that Adelaide is one of the toughest in the world because of the lack of air moisture. And there's a reason why Victoria, to the east of me, is called the Garden State, because the conditions are much milder. That's just the way it is. So what is my background? I have been a professional gardener for 25 years with a focus on creating and repairing formal structure. In more recent years, the focus has slightly moved towards garden design as my garden, Yalamurra, has become more renowned. I've picked up jobs as a result of it. But initially I was obsessed with formal structure. And then over time, that has changed. And in around 2017, I started to see some of Pete Ordorf's work, and I was just blown away because I was just living in little Adelaide. We are so conservative here, and I was just doing all these formal gardens, and I thought, this is the bee's knees. There's nothing more to gardening, just formal, formal, formal. And then all of a sudden I came across Pete Ordorf's work, and I was just amazed. It was an emotional response. I thought, wow, that is just so beautiful. That's what I want to do. Of course, I was delusional. I wouldn't be able to do that, but because of the conditions. But what drew it to me, it was sort of like a gateway drug, because his Humolo garden in maybe 2010, it had the waves of the yew hedge going through it. And I could link to that formal element and then have the juxtaposition of the informal perennial plantings against that hedge. And it just seemed just right. If it didn't have that formal element, maybe I wouldn't have been drawn into it quite so much. And so that was the starting point. And I figured, look, I could keep doing formal structure for another 20 years and maybe a little bit better, but why don't I actually pursue this different line of work? And so it was very intimidating when you reach the very top of one particular field to then actually go, I'm going to start at the bottom. I have no idea about perennial gardens. I have no idea how it works, design-wise, anything. I just started again. So anyway, after seeing Ordorf's work, nothing was ever the same, so I headed in a completely different direction. So this is Yalamurra Garden, and this is 3 acres of the actual garden area. The property is 10 acres, but I've only really condensed it down to approximately 3 acres. So when I bought the property, it didn't really have all these tracks that you can see circumventing the house. There was a little bit, but then I came in, and my first real task was, because I had no idea what to do, was to create these paths and tracks going everywhere with a skid steer such that I could get machinery everywhere. I was just trying to reduce the amount of work I had to do because I did the entire thing just myself. I didn't employ anyone to help me. And so that's why it took 12 years. It was quite a process. And the block is very, very slopey. It slopes from the bottom of the screen to the top end of the screen. It is very, very quite steep, but it's deceptive. And so this ellipse is just showing where the next photo is being taken from. It's being taken from the right where the lawn is, and the angle of the shot is going down to the left parallel with the house. So that just gives you an indication. And so this is 2013, and it was pretty brutal. So this is just after purchasing the property in 2012, and really I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it just seemed like, yep, let's just have a go. And anyway, 4 years later, it was really 4 years later before I really started to get some kind of understanding as to what I needed to do. Because I'd tried so many other things and they'd pretty much failed, that I figured, well, why don't I do something different? And this is 2016. And so this is still a previous incarnation of what I was trying to do. I had a lot more lawn. I was irrigating with bore water. I just figured when I bought the place, I've got a bore. I can just use that and just really pretty much get away with a lot of things. I can pretty much garden how I garden in Adelaide, but that was definitely not the case. So anyway, here I'm trying to make a lawn, a very big lawn, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm not doing too bad here. But this was due to change because of the water mold called Phytophthora. I didn't realize I had that problem, but it's called Phytophthora because it's a plant destroyer, but really it's a root destroyer. And I just had no concept of it, didn't understand it. It took me years to understand what the actual problem was. I was a very good gardener for formal gardens, irrigated gardens in the city, but this was really beyond me. And so anyway, at the time, I had killed a lot of plants at this stage. I was a professional plant killer, and it had been very unsuccessful as far as getting the gardens progress. And I just didn't know why. And what really piqued my interest was the fact that I couldn't grow a kikuyu lawn. I mean, this is a weed. You try and stop this thing. Usually, it just grows and grows and grows. So I am regularly watering this lawn, and it gradually just deteriorates more and more because the roots are rotting off. And so it doesn't really matter how much you water, the lawn just kept on going backwards further and further. And so even though I was losing plants in the garden prior to that, I just thought, oh, yep, I'm just not watering enough. I'm not doing this. But then when the kikuyu died, I figured there's more going on here. And so I decided maybe I need to do something different. And so it was like, so what do I do? I had no idea. So, whoops, I'm just going to change this slide. I may have gone too far. Anyway, so I decided, whoops, go back. So I decided to change everything. I decided to change my approach. I would stop doing everything I was doing and come up with a different alternative to the gardening that I was doing. Obviously, I had seen Pete Ordorf's work at the time. I couldn't do what he was doing. So I started to do something different. This is autumn 2024. So this is last year in autumn. And this is after probably 4 to 5 months of no water. So this is the last part of the garden in its cycle. It's going to regenerate when we get to winter. So I get to enjoy my autumn color and everything's deteriorating and I'm holding on to as much structure as I can to the very last moment. Because if I was to come in and cut all this down, I would get nothing to enjoy. And so I just pretty much leave it. And that reduces my maintenance as well. And this is winter. So this would be 2 to 3 months on from that previous slide. Same position, same shot. You can see the Ionium starting to flower and it's starting to develop. It's probably mid-July because I can tell because of the prunus are in flower. They always flower very, very early on. And so once again, this is the approximate same position as that lawn that I've pulled out. So I had to spray out that lawn because even though it was rubbish, it still wouldn't die, of course. So this is winter. And then we progress on to spring. So this is spring. So this is when photosynthesis is at its absolute maximum. I've got enough moisture. We've got the amount of hours of light is increasing constantly. And so everything is really at its absolute peak at this point in time. And this is where I get my maximum color because I've got maximum photosynthesis. So that's what's going on here. Same shot again, very similar location, but this is a little bit later in spring. On the left-hand side at the front, you've got Centaurea gymnocarpa. That's about to flower soon. The French lavender is still in flower. Everything is absolutely alive and thriving. And so this is the same area as that lawn I showed you previously. The lawn required considerable energy inputs, but produced an extremely poor result. This requires almost no inputs from me whatsoever. I just walk around taking photos. Okay, I have to plant the plants initially and maybe bulk up certain spots. And I do end up trimming off side branches on the trunks of the trees, but that's pretty much it. And so this requires so little effort to produce this. And over time, this is what I really enjoy. It might seem very, very confronting. There's no color harmony, but I'm trying to make a garden for 12 months of the year. There's no peak season. This might be peak color, but there's no peak season. I'm trying to extend the enjoyment in the garden for every day of the year if possible. Okay, sometimes the weather's bad and sometimes the light's not good, etc., etc. But that's just how it is. And so if we go forward another couple of months, this is summer just before Christmas. And so you can see the color is washed out. So that's why I'm quite happy to have outrageous color at certain times of the year. So everything is pretty much the same. The structure is the same, but it may be past its best. The Centaurea gymnocarpa in the front left again, that's finished flowering, but it's got this beautiful rose gold, a dead flower that will hold on to it for another 6 months. And every day when the sun comes out, the flower opens and is beautiful, and then it closes when the sun goes down. If you've got a cloudy day, it'll stay closed. It's just like a beautiful piece of structure. So it's a very structural garden. I'm not interested in cutting things back and doing whatever the garden. It's a massive garden. It pretty much has to do its own thing with a little bit of tinkering from me. And then this is summer. This is after Christmas. So this is about a month or two later. And so we've progressed again further to a straw color. And so now my greens become very much the highlight color. I'm always looking for contrast of color. And so as you can see from the photos, I get many, many different gardens per year. And that's really the process that I'm going through. And so this is my complete transformation from a formalist, where I wanted just a static garden. That was my ethos. And now I really want a contrived, wild, a dynamic garden at all moments, at all times. Yes, there are plenty of signs of the past with the presence of a few formal structures, but they were planted all 10 years ago. And so generally now I don't actually plant formal structures in my designs or the garden. I pretty much, I haven't planted a formal structure for probably 6 or 7 years. I just don't bother. So anyway, I don't necessarily have a problem with formal structure, but it's just overused in garden design. I think it is idealized and generally used as a compensation for poor design in a garden. So I'd like a different balance. Like we're talking about that juxtaposition between Pete Ordoff, he had his formal structure and then perennials. I'm quite happy to have a lot more informal plantings and just have a splash of formal structure. But I consider my trees to be a formal structure. You'll see I've cleaned up the trunks of all my trees, and then I get a lot of formal structure with the cactus and succulents. And so I can compensate for the randomity, the wildness with structure in other things instead of having to produce a formal structure that will require trimming on a regular basis. And so how did I do it? Well, it required a great deal of hard work and gumption, of course. However, initially, again, I pursued more stupid ideas which failed, and because I still didn't understand the conditions. And so, of course, having seen these perennial gardens in Europe, I just fell in love with them. And of course, I wanted to try all those perennial plants. And so, of course, I got all those sexy, fashionable plants. How could I resist? And then after that brief soiree of just killing all those, I figured actually I haven't really got that much time. This is probably around 2018, 2019. I really had to move on and really find a winning approach. And so this is the next batch of pictures I'm going to show. So these are on the high side of the house. And once again, it's from right to left. And then I will actually swap over at some point and show you some photos from the left and right, but just to give you an idea where this next batch of photos are going to be. And so this was 2013. And you can see the quality of the soil, very, very, that clay that has been compacted into a very, very soft rock. That's that bank in the foreground and the background. Not a particularly good growing media. You can see the tiny little pencil pines that I've put in. You might be able to see them, but you'll be able to see them better in some of the next shots. So 2013, still no idea what I was doing. And then this is last year. So this is spring last year. And so what I started doing, I just kept on condensing the battery of plants I was using down to the survivors. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, and I went through a process of trialing plants occasionally, but they never made it. And so I just kept on reverting back to the plants that would make it. And it's really just such an like a simple old school technique or approach whereby you just use the ones that work. I know sometimes we really apply this rule and we like to avoid it, and we like to use horticulture to sneak around it. But I tried everything, and so I just resorted back to this approach. And then by doing it, I just realized, well, I just have to be much more creative and maybe far more daring and just far more confronting with the approach that I would take. So I've always been happy to invest time in the garden. I've spent probably tens of thousands of hours in the garden to get to this point. And so the creation of a energy intensive garden would have just been beyond me, because this was taking up all my time just to reach this point. And so to go for, that very, very water intense, energy intense garden, it just wasn't a practical approach. It's just not a winning strategy. And so hence I just resorted to the plotters and the weeds and the aeoniums, the French lavender. In the distance, you can see Aleogene hugulei, which is called like a native hibiscus. Beautiful structure, beautiful flower in spring, although it tends to get very, very desiccated and washed out in summer. And so when I inherited you can't see them too well, we'll see them in another shot, the purple or the lilac flower in the distance, it was very, very big and leggy, and it would look like a bit like a pelargonium. And I would find that it just looked rubbish in summer, and I didn't like them, and I was going to pull them all out. And at one point, I just coppiced them all, because I'll coppice them all and then I'll pull them out later. And I never got around to it, and they all started regrowing again. And then I started trimming them, and I realized I could turn them into these beautiful domes. They're just these soft, fluffy domes, and it's one of my favorite things to trim. If I don't trim them, well, then I get this beautiful lilac flower in spring. So they have multiple uses. I use plants in multiple ways. The leucadendron, I love the leucadendron, but they are very, very susceptible to Phytophthora. So same thing again, I reckon I've planted maybe 70 or 80 leucadendrons, and I've probably got about 5 or 6 left. But I haven't planted them again for maybe 5 or 6 years, because it's just a waste of time, despite I love them. The structure, the winter color is absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so this is the same shot again, but this is morning light. Those previous shots were afternoon light shooting into the sun. This is morning light with the light behind me, and so just a completely different effect as far as taking a photo. And I've become so influenced by taking photos in the garden. That's what I really enjoy. I really make the garden to take photos now. And so then I want to manipulate a camera in a garden and the light to get the shot that I want. It just adds extra value to the garden. You put all this effort into making a garden, you really want to extract the maximum amount of return for that investment. So anyway, my new approach was to arrange plants in interesting ways and just see what happens. And it became so enjoyable just to do that, especially after so much failure. It was just experimenting and playing in the garden, and it just became so easy, as opposed to what people mostly take in the approach that I was doing. I was trying to imitate other people who were operating within a different climate. That is a very, very, well, if you've got a lot of money, maybe you can do it, but and very good help, and you've got a lot of time to spend in the garden. But if you don't have that, well, then it's just better to use plants that work. Anyway, failure is the mother of innovation, and that's what happened to me after many, many years. And gradually a garden began to emerge, and then that encouraged me more and more, and I became more adventurous, and I'd try new ideas because I would see these ideas happening. So these are a closer look at the pencil pines that you could see before in the distance. This is 2016, and they're probably about 4 years old at this time. And really, the pencil pine, trimming them and keeping them very, very skinny, really evolved over the last probably 2 or 3 years prior to this, because I just happened to be out doing a bit of night gardening at 10 o'clock at night, a little headlamp on, and I just started playing around with the pencil pines and trimming them. And all of a sudden just developed a new technique that I really enjoy, because then I get the punctuation, I get the formality of a formal structure, but I don't obscure the view. And so I'm sort of creating this little mini forest. That's my theory. And so, but it's not obscuring, and I can use it to take photos because I can block out the sun by getting in the right spot, and then I can look through and see all the garden. So it's like people have said it's sort of like a punctuation mark, and I tend to agree. And having said that, when I planted these, because they're planted in absolute rubbish, I would come home occasionally when they were younger, and they were just been fallen over. They were lying on the ground, and I go, oh, they're done, and I'd stake them back up. And they got to this point, and they're still going. I've lost 2 pencil pines in 12 years. And so that is an excellent result. And what we find in Adelaide is that a lot of the pencil pines in Adelaide, which get watered, they get fertilised, they get all these things, they get borer. I've only lost 1 to borer, and so I don't water them. I don't do anything. I suspect that they dislike getting watered in winter, but once you make them a water junkie, you're kind of stuffed, and you've got to keep on going down that track. So you're better off having a very slow growing plant rather than watering and fertilizing and making it grow when it doesn't really want to grow. Fertilizing in spring, heading into our hot, dry Mediterranean summers, is a very bad idea. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Next shot. Okay, so this is late spring. You can see my Centaurea gymnocarpa on the side, which you hadn't seen the flower of that yet. So that always flowers the first week of November, every single year. That has been an absolute winner. That was a couple of cuttings I got out of a client's garden maybe 8 years ago, and I put them in just a cutting, and they just started growing. And so they'll grow to maybe a 3 metre round bush. You can trim it if you wanted to. You don't have to. It may last anywhere from 6 months to 5 years before it just gets too big and woody and leggy, but they're just so easy to pull out. So it's not really a chore. And I've planted them everywhere. They're a space filler. They're a weed competitor. I use it for all different reasons. Glorious colour. I get grey in winter. So with my garden, you'll see the contrast between winter and summer. In winter, I have too much green when all the everything starts producing chlorophyll. I get too much of a domination of green, and so my grey is the way to soften it. And also when I get flowers, that softens the amount of green. But when we transition to the drier months, I get too much grey and straw, and that's when I need the contrast of the green of certain plants that are still producing chlorophyll as my contrast. When you look at gardens, you'll see people, generally they have this green backdrop of plants. They want green leaves, and then you're trying to grow a coloured plant to pop against that green. Well, I don't have that in summer, so I've reversed everything. I've got a grey or a straw colour, and green is my pop contrast colour in summer. So that's just how I do it.
Sorry, Kurt, can I just ask you, somebody was asking which cultivar of Centaura is it?
Centaurea gymnocarpa.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's one of the knapweeds, but yeah, you should be able to find it somewhere, and you can pretty much grow it like a succulent. So when I use it, I will go into an area, and if I want 1 plant, I'll plant 5 cuttings. And then I'm guaranteed, I don't care where they all grow, but hopefully I'll definitely get 1 grow. And then what I've had happen is that I put cuttings in, and they look like they've died, and there's nothing there. And we get to winter the next year. So I've planted in winter. We go through a whole season, summer, and it looks like, no, it hasn't made it. And then it starts sending up this shoot the next year. I don't know how it does it. It is absolutely an amazing plant. Sometimes they won't make it and they can rot out, but it doesn't matter. You just go crazy with it. You just use cutting. It's such a cheap way to do it. Anyway.
Kurt, I'm just sorry to interrupt you again. I just wanted to let everybody know on the call that you have given me a plant list.
Okay. Yes.
You have. So before those questions start happening, I will send you all the list from Kurt. Okay. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
And so anyway, so what I did with the garden is just condense my planting process down to only winter, because I found that all other times of the year it was problematic. And so all I really do now is operate within this 3-month period of frantic work, of planting as much as I possibly can at that time period. And what I'm doing in that time period is really replacing dead plants. So I still get a degree of attrition. Plants will just die randomly here, there, and whatever, but I don't really have a problem with that. It's really a rolling garden. A space then becomes an opportunity to try something different, to adjust the design. It's an ever-evolving garden. So not only is it static, it's not static for the fact that it's not just all formal, it is dynamic for the fact that it changes through the season and the design continually changes too. I am trying to push this thing as hard as I possibly can. Push it till it breaks. And so what I'm doing, so I'm replacing dead plants, I'm adjusting newer existing designs with fresh new plantings where things die. And also I'm developing juvenile beds and new beds. So with the garden, I'm still gradually moving the garden out further and further and further, because I'm still struggling in areas where, even though I know what I'm doing, it seems to be still extremely hard to get plants to establish. And that's just how it is. And so anyway, developing juvenile beds, before I put my planting tools away for 9 months. And so that is my planting process each year. And so this is summer. And so the other 9 months is used mainly for enjoying the garden and considering the garden and coming up with what I want to do that next winter. So really I spend 9 months of the year considering the garden. I do have to do some regular trimming. So I will trim all my topiaries and my hedges. And so that's probably about a 3 to 4 hour job. I would probably do that maybe once a month, but I just chop and drop. I don't do any cleaning up or anything like that, because all that just gets dropped straight on the ground. It becomes a mulch. It's all lost within all these other plantings. You don't really notice it. So I can get away with that as well. And really, I suppose the only time I will take something away is if I'm pruning a very large bush, or I have to remove a very large dead bush, or a tree limb has fallen off, and okay, yes, then I may take it away. Excuse me. And so this approach saves me a lot of time. Okay, so this is the reverse direction of that same section we saw before. This is 2014, so you can see the pencil pines are a little bit lower. You can see how bare this bank is. You can see some little self-sown lavenders. Self-sown lavenders are the best plants you can possibly get. Obviously, if they germinate and they survive, they are going to be your absolute premium plants. One thing I definitely noticed is that there's the theory, and it's a very good theory, is that when you're trying to grow a garden, you look around the area and you look to see what is growing and what is doing well, and then you go down to the nursery and buy those plants. Well, the next level up from that is to get cuttings or seeds from plants that are already existing directly in your area. You rule out maybe another 5 or 10% of failure. So that is definitely an approach to consider. Try and source your plants as close to where you are growing them as possible. If I have bought lavenders, French lavenders from the nursery, brought them home, put them in, and they have died just as quickly as any other plants. I have to tell you that nursery grown plants are generally of very poor quality. I'm not sure whether the artificial media has deteriorated over the years, but definitely the amount of overhead watering nursery plants generally get, they are just not in very good condition when you put them in the ground, and you're really going to have to overhead water them in the ground until they establish. And so it just kind of depends on how much time you have. And so anyway, yep, this is 2014. This is 2016, 2 years on, and you can see there's a little bit of gradual development. I've done a little bit more planting. The pencil pines are a little bit higher. The aeoniums have spread them a little bit further. And so the aeonium, the tree aeonium, I had 3 plants. I inherited 3 plants from the original owners, the previous owners, and I just broke off every single cutting and stuck them in the ground. And then every year they would grow, and I would break off every single cutting and go again and go again and go again. And in some areas in Australia, they are definitely, they're encouraged not to use them because they can self-seed. I have never had an aeonium self-seed in my garden, presumably because of the Phytophthora, because really they should. It's absolutely madness. In the distance, you might be able to see some little lime green blobs, and they are Acacia limelight, one of the new cultivars that have been developed over the last 10 years. Well, that seemed like a very good idea at the time. Not a good idea. They all died. So we were able to forget that idea. So don't bother about that one. Next shot. So this is early autumn, and I know it's early autumn because you can see the aeoniums are just starting to open up. And what happens is, as we get into autumn, well, then the nights start getting colder, and so the dew starts forming on the leaves. I'm talking about this relative humidity. Well, obviously the relative humidity is increasing, and so even though there's no soil moisture, it hasn't started raining yet, the plants know that the moisture is starting to come. They're absorbing it from that dew that rests on the leaves at nighttime. and they're starting to grow. And so that's just like an indication that the conditions are getting milder. And so other maintenance that I have to do in the garden, well, that really involves spraying my paths and driveways to keep weeds out. So funnily enough, there are numerous weeds that love growing in the paths. They just adapted to that kind of very, very poor fertility. So that's one thing I have to do. And I also need to go through the garden and manage running grasses like the kikuyu that wouldn't grow in my lawn. Well, it grows in the garden beds. Obviously, it likes the diversity and it likes to have friends and things like that. So I need to come in and spray that out from time to time to stop it from spreading too much. I mean, it's crazy. Just, I mean, grow where I want it to grow, but it won't. The irony. So next shot. So this is winter. So you can see that progression from the autumn, and the Aeoniums are in absolute full photosynthesis at the moment. They are producing a lot of energy, and they're producing flowers now too. Very, very lush. They're very, very lush. There is no stress on the garden at the moment. I could pull out any plant and I can lay it on the ground and it will survive. It won't be a problem. And you would know in your own environment, there are times of the year where you can get away with this, unless you get snow or severe frost or something like that. That would be problematic. So as soon as I reach mid-autumn every year, that would probably more that previous shot, I know that the garden has survived for another year. And so this is winter, and you can see that there's just no plant stress whatsoever, at least compared to summer. And like I was saying earlier, I mean, we have very, very mild winters. There's no stress. It's just relaxed. Okay, this is not my relaxed time because this is when I'm working the hardest. So it's not my relaxed time, to be fair. But I don't have to worry about plants dying, put it that way. And then this is spring. This is probably another month or two onwards. A little bit further progression. You will see, obviously, the seed heads from the Aeoniums from the previous year. I don't cut them off. I want to hold on to them as long as possible. I like the contrast between the yellow and the brown. Years ago, I used to hate yellow. This is when I was very mature, probably maybe eight years ago. And I used to go around and cut all the yellow flowers off because I couldn't stand them. That's how immature and I just couldn't handle it. But I have evolved. And so now I love them. I love the absolute in-your-face contrast because it's only for a very short period of time. So I embrace it when I have it, and then I just accept that that's the way it is. So how does the garden exist and maintain itself? Well, most plants in Yalamurra garden spend winter and early spring photosynthesizing and producing all their energy requirements for the whole year. And if they don't do that, they won't make it. It's as simple as that. And this is probably another month further on. You can see the stress is starting to happen. The Aeoniums are past that very, very bright yellow, and they're starting to deteriorate. It's getting hotter. There's probably no soil moisture left. The French lavenders are finished, so it's getting a bit hotter and a bit drier. So when I stopped watering and fertilizing 6 years ago, I was pleasantly surprised as to how little effect it had on my garden. Only a little bit drier, and now I wouldn't even be able to tell. And so, I mean, I got to the point where I was watering and I couldn't see any benefit from it. And I'd have to be walking around and checking pipes, and pipes would pop off and water would be running down the hill. And it's like, this is crazy. And it was at that same time, we had a week of high 40s. It was just like 45, 46, 47, 46 every single day. And I was watering every day, and the garden was just suffering. All the plants looked like hell. And so I thought, I'm just going to stop watering. I was pretty confident that the garden was going to survive, but there's always that thought in the back of your head that what if just everything just is destroyed? Everything could have been destroyed and had nothing. But I figured, no, just going to do it, live on the edge. And so I did, and I got away with it. And every subsequent year, I would still think maybe this is the year when everything dies. And I've just got away with it for 6 years. And so now it's just like, I don't even think about it. I don't even think about it for a second. It doesn't matter how dry it is, doesn't matter how wet it is what it is. And so this is summer 2024. This would be pre-Christmas. So for the first 9 years of the garden consumed all my free time for the whole year. I was constantly landscaping and digging paths, and it really was quite a chore. And I just didn't get a return. Plants are just dying all the time. It's a very, very large space, and it just soaks up plants like no tomorrow. So you go in and you just completely plant an area, and you go and stand back and you think, I can't actually see that I've achieved anything. And then what you find is that so many of them die. And so then the next year you get to go, I really got to do the same area again. And so I would go every year, it's like the same area, the same area. But by doing the same area over and over again, I would actually consider it in a slightly different way. And so I learned a lot. When you consider exactly the same space and area again and again and again, you think of it in different ways. And each that 12-month period, you've learned a lot of new things. And you think, actually, I'm going to approach it in a slightly different way. And I'm going to arrange the plants in a different way. I'm going to blend it in a different way. And it just created all these new ideas. It was it became very, very exciting. And now I deliberately do stupid things and make silly combinations because I'm very interested in things I've never seen before. I have no interest in imitation. I just come up with my own ideas, and that's what I do in the garden. It makes it very, very easy. So, and so whilst it's an extremely annoying process to do it over and over again, it teaches one a lot about gardening and horticulture. So this is the next batch of photos, and they're going to be shooting down the hill. So it's from the bottom part of the screen to the top part of the screen. So this is what the land looked like when I moved in. Previously, it had been used for sheep grazing, and then the previous owners then used it. They had a couple of horses, and so they'd fenced off the paddocks. And I suspect that all the paddocks were sort of fairly heavily grazed, and so they were in poor condition as well. And so this is 2016, 4 years on, and you can see the garden starting to progress. These are a paperbark. This is Melaleuca necrophilia that I inherited a couple, and then I went and bought about another 500 because when I saw this straight away, I said, wow, that looks exactly like a Japanese box. This is what I trim all day, every day in clients' gardens. But this is a much bigger shrub. It's quite a scraggly shrub, and I had never seen it before. And I started trimming them up, and they held their shape beautifully. So this is a paperbark, little leaf, same as the buxus, and that's what I started using. And that's what I started using for all these domes and for hedges in different parts of the garden. You can see a couple of lavenders, you can see a couple of Dietes grandiflora, and you can also see a Yucca filamentosa. They are absolute heroes of the garden, and some cotyledons, and some Agave attenuata. And then this is what this area looks like now. So this is spring, and you can see those Melaleuca necrophilia. They are approximately 1.5 meters high and probably about 2 meters wide. You don't really get this scope because they've closed it in of how actually big they are and how big they are. They used to be much smaller, but then as everything grew and the garden grew, I realized, well, the formal structure needs to be so big. Everything needs to be in balance relative to the size of the landscape that you are producing. So anyway, as I was mentioning in recent years, I was very busy all the time, but now outside the planting period, I really just wander around and mainly just tinker and consider the garden. And it's a very enjoyable experience now. I tend to think I manage probably one of the biggest gardens in Australia just by myself. I made it all myself. I maintain it all myself, but it requires almost nothing. It would be the lowest maintenance, lowest energy input garden that you would find just about anywhere. Well, I think, or definitely up there anyway. And so anyway, the less time that one spends having to work in a garden and keeping plants alive with those energy inputs, the more time there is to consider it. And that's how you really get an excellent design in your garden. You have to think, well, what if I did this, and how's this going to relate? And that's how you get that next level, in my opinion. And so this is autumn, same shot, slightly different orientation. Everything is gone through a long, hot, dry summer. You can see the pears in the corner on the right going into their autumn color. Completely different garden again. You know, all these gardens, I want to enjoy it. And so these Melaleuca necrophilia here, they are 2 meters wide, 1.5 meters high. You just don't get the context of it. And I deliberately do that. I like to play all these games with depth and aperture with a camera lens. So this is this is actually summer, and so this is a much shot further back. And what I like to do is to make very, very big landscapes. Most people like to close it in, and I showed you some closed in shots before, but really I want to. The challenge, I think it's very, very hard to fill a very, very big landscape with plantings that you actually want to look at. It's much easier to go in and put a lot of repetition and symmetry and repeat the same thing over and over and over again. Or I actually want complexity. I want like a Where's Wally situation. I want to have to look and look closely and absorb and soak up all the little interactions and enjoy every little thing that I can. So that's what I'm doing. So anyway, I want a very rich and complex experience that revolves around one's own ideas and expressing them within a challenging environment. The process is simply observing the garden, which stimulates new ideas. So I observe and photograph the garden, rinse and repeat, and just do the same thing again. So come up with ideas, put them in the garden, look at them and develop, watch them, photograph them, think, how am I going to do it better, or how will I use that effect somewhere else, etc., etc. It's just not rocket science. It really is pretty simple when you get down to it. And so this is another area looking back towards the house from the other side of the garage. This was 2016. And my winners, Yucca filamentosa, the pears. But so there's about 7 or 8 pears I had planted down the side here because this is more my formal stage back 12 years ago, and I wanted a like an alleyway of pears. But as it was, only 4 have survived. They all rotted out. They looked like crap. And actually, when I stopped watering, they actually started doing better. So anyway, I lost 4. So I lost 4, and I've got 4 left in this location. And I have considered taking more of them out, but for the time being, I've left them in because I kind of do like the effect that they make. And so this is looking back at the house, the Melaleuca again. And so what you see with my garden, it is very, very big. And so I can move around the garden and I can use the same elements, which look completely different from one angle and orientation. I can use them again in a completely different orientation and different angle and get a completely different scenario. So same thing again, I'm getting many, many, many gardens for the price of one. This is a little bit longer. You can see a little bit longer in the year. This is in later in spring. This is late spring. Everything stops being green mid-spring, and then it's just that gradual decline. And so looking back at the house. So for me, the garden is an ecosystem, and I greatly appreciate the wildlife that have come to enjoy it too. So the number of bird life that has increased since the garden has reached this point, it is amazing. In all these little tiny little birds have come into the garden, all these little flocks, and they scoot around because now they have habitat. And they haven't actually come into the garden until this last sort of 4 or 5 years because there just wasn't the energy in the garden. There wasn't enough plants. There wasn't enough insects. And so if you build it, they will come. And so this is later in the season again. This is summer. So, but first, all that biology, all those mammals, all the lizards, the skinks, the snakes, they need a food source, and that comes from plants. And as plants drive everything on this planet, they're harnessing the energy from the sun, and they push it into the soil, the leaves, etc., etc. And that's how you build an ecosystem, and that's how you get the wildlife coming too. So photosynthesis is harnessing the sun's energy through the production of sugar, and that is really the key. I'm simply trying to run my garden on empty at all times by putting no energy in, but letting the plants do their thing and produce the most complex ecosystem that I possibly can. It is generally better to put the plants under a little bit of stress rather than coddling them with too much water, too much fertilizer. When you do that, you bypass a number of systems that a plant needs to go through to really complete all its natural mechanisms. And so that's why it's better to put the plants under a little bit of stress. You make a much better plant. Stress at another time of the year strengthens the plant ready for maybe some severe heat stress at another time of the year. So this is another area looking back to the house. So this is 2016, lots of weeds, lots of capeweed. Capeweed is definitely a massive winter weed here, also marshmallow weed. And so that's why I need to smother the landscape to compete. Otherwise, I mean, I don't really go through and pull out weeds anyway. I can't really be bothered. I'm quite happy. I know like the capeweed's going to die as soon as we get hot weather. I don't pull out soursels because I know they're going to collapse as soon as I get hot weather. It's like I need to weigh up the cost of energy to go through and pull them out or spray them as opposed to doing nothing. Maybe aesthetically, it maybe doesn't look quite so good, but it's like, look, just let them go. They're going to collapse and be done. Focus the time on planting plants that will eventually outcompete the degree of sunlight that's going to hit the soil. And so this is 2024 in autumn. So very, very dry, the last part of the garden year. And so my garden really has become a photographer's garden, possibly above all else. That is the driver now. I was very hesitant for this to happen 6 years ago when I first bought a camera, but now I embrace it. Yeah, I absolutely love it. I garden to then take a photo, capture that digital picture and hold it for prosperity. And then it's just using the light that happens, how the light changes at different times of the year. That's what I'm using. This is winter, and so my winter color is definitely the aloes. The aloes are just such a great plant. And to the left, you can see one of my other lycodendrons, which has survived. And so that's why they're such a great plant. Obviously, the Ioniums, I'll get that winter color as well. And you can see with my garden, I go for a lot of structural, architectural verticality. Architectural verticality in other plants in the flower stalk, the tree trunks, the pencil pines, they give a degree of formality. And so that allows me to, in my opinion, to be more chaotic with the other plantings. And even with the other plantings, they still do have a degree of verticality, which instills some degree of formality in the garden too. So I look at this and I just pick up and read what I want to read, and a degree of formality that maybe most other people do not see. And I accept that, but I do what I like. I'm the client. This is further on in spring, and this is this year. And so this year has been very, very dry spring. And so there really hasn't been the same amount of growth as previous years. My cardoons this year and last year were probably about 1.2 to 1.5 meters. The year prior to that, when we had plenty of rain, they were 3 meters high. They were absolutely stunning. The whole garden was just absolutely crazy, absolutely amazing. So rain is just so important. Without rain, you can't get photosynthesis. You're not getting energy production. And so if I flick to the previous year's garden, same time, this is the growth I had the previous year at exactly the same time of year. I've got Queen Anne's lace is going bananas over here. I've got wild carrot. I've got an artichoke at the front going crazy. The euphorbia is doing better. I've even got a verbena growing, which hardly ever grows. It is it's really weird. You would think verbena would grow, but really it prefers that hotter time of the year. And what happens? The root system rots off and it collapses as soon as we hit summer. So this is my crazy time, if possible. So this clearly illustrates the relationship between rain and growth. Without the rain, just can't get the growth. And these are all morning backlight shots. So the morning, the sunlight is in front. I'm taking the shot into the light, a bit shading the lens to make sure I can get this shot. And really it is the play of light and shadow with the influence of color and structure that make a perfect match, in my opinion. And so this is evening. This is the same shot really in evening time, and the sun is behind me, and you can just see it completely changes the color of the shot. And so once again, I get a different garden again. I'm all about how many gardens a year can I get? Same day. It can be the same day and I get a completely different garden, completely different feel. It's given me reward for my effort. This is during the day. Another winner that I can't remember what I put on the list was chicory. I'm not sure whether any of you guys use chicory. That is something I started trialing maybe 3 years. Probably the one plant that's probably been successful that I've trialed in the last maybe 3 years. And it's obviously it's a tuber, and it's like a rhizome kind of tubery thing. And it likes a slightly wetter area. So this is a slightly wetter area because water runs down the driveway into this section. You'll see I've got a couple of sedge in the middle of that section too. So definitely chicory is something to consider if you can get it and you can grow it and it grows. I can see in some gardens it could potentially become a weed because it is that tough. So, be wary, but in my garden, almost nothing has become a weed. So you have to understand I have some degree of maintenance control because not many things germinate. Same thing again. This is my one miscanthus. That's the thing. You might wonder, well, why do I use all these weed grasses? You'll see where do I get the softness and the movement with the weed grasses. Well, I can't grow any of the ornamental grasses. They just won't grow. I've tried Calamagrostis and Steepers. Every single ornamental grass you can think of, I have tried. And it's only this one miscanthus. And I've actually tried this miscanthus in many other spots, many other miscanthus. I'll get miscanthus from other people's properties. I'll buy miscanthus because I think, what if I get a slightly different genetics in a particular Calamagrostis, any kind of plant, and maybe it will grow. So that was my approach when I trial different plants. I try and get them from a different source in the hope that they may have the genetics to survive, but it just hasn't worked. This is the one Miscanthus that has survived, and I do put some runoff from my EnviroCycle on it, and it ends up just being it should be a 2.5 meter high Miscanthus, and it's about 1 meter high. It is the runtiest Miscanthus you've ever seen, but I love it dearly. See, there you go. You see, I'm using horticulture to keep a plant alive. But we've got to do these things. But it's just such a beautiful way to design with the grasses. So I'm addicted. So anyway, that's just how it is. So the design process is to accentuate visible contrast. People talk about harmony and things like that. Well, I'm doing the opposite. I'm going for contrast. At all times, I want to be able to see everything, make everything pop. And so I want visible contrast that can be expressed in an aesthetically pleasing mosaic. I'm trying to create mosaics. I never want to really use block planting. Block planting is, in my opinion, a very, very poor approach to planting. Not only as far as creating a diverse ecosystem, you're far better off blending, but I just find blending and a mosaic a far more interesting approach. But I think this needs to be achieved with a sustainable manner. There's no point developing anything if it's going to actually cost you a lot of time and money to do, and this doesn't cost me very much time or energy at all, so it's a winner. And this is the final group of photos. This is below the garden, looking from the sort of the top to the bottom of the screen. And this is what it looked like in 2012, just the paddocks. Obviously, I started digging a track out the back, and it's deceptive. It's very, very slopey. And there was a few moments where I had interesting moments when I was cutting out tracks where I thought, I really don't want to roll down the hill, because if I started rolling down the hill, it would have been a long time before the machine would have stopped. And once again, this is spring, and so I want to go crazy. I want an absolute kaleidoscope of color, because this is such a short period of time. And you can see numerous topiary balls down here. There's a different kind of Melaleuca at the front. Then there's a Grevillea. Then we've got another Grevillea. And then you've got an Aleogene in the background. And then some Moluccas to the left up the top. So they were early plantings that survived. And then I just eventually just topiarized them. So I do actually have quite a few topiaries in the garden. And they are all native plants that have been topiarized. There is the odd olive. But they were the survivors. And yeah, so anyway, that worked. And then this is later in spring. You can see the Centaurea gymnocarpa that I've planted everywhere. And you get this sea of pink. It is, this is my pastel phase. So that was my very, very severe color contrast before. And this is the softer pastel stage as all the weed grasses start curing and everything starts collapsing and falling apart. It's just how it is. And you can see a Grevillea robusta in the distance, this tree with the orange flowers. So that is a beautiful tree, very, very tough. And you get this time of year where it's just covered in bright orange flowers, which is great. Love it. And this is summer, but this is with the light behind me. And so this is later again. All the grasses have cured. And as you can see my topiaries just popping. They are my contrast, as well as the trees, which are still green. So that's what I do. And that is the end of it. That is done.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Kurt. I think was completely inspiring. I love this idea of having 12 gardens a year. I think that
more than that. We've got to have more than 12.
I
We're
mean,
looking at 104.
Okay. Let's go on to gallery so that we can all see each other. You're going to stop your screen, share. Take it off. There you go. Okay, there we all are. So I saw loads and loads and loads of questions coming through on the chat. So if you would like to take those away, Yvonne, for us quickly. Fantastic images to inspire, and I love the chaos of it myself.
Oh, I love the chaos.
I'm a Virgo controlled gardener, and I need to get some chaos. So let's go because there's a lot of questions.
Okay. Fantastic. I mean, I don't even know where to start. We've got so many chat questions coming in, but the very last of those comments came in from Vilmian here in Italy, saying that this was the transformation not just of a garden, but of a gardener. And as a professional killer of plants myself, I'm totally inspired.
We're all professional.
We plant killers should stick together. Yeah.
Yes.
And really, I think a lot of the feedback we're getting through the chat, for those who are expressing just enthusiasm and praise, is your use of the contrasting colours and tones and textures, and inverting what we so often find in Mediterranean type gardens. It's instead of it just being a floating mass of amorphous silver, which gets ruthlessly hacked back a couple of times a year. This is something which is it's much more visceral because it's grounded. The aeoniums are of course your star of the show, but I think all of us in our different climatic areas have plants we can go to find this sort of color contrast. I mean, here in central Italy, for example, the cotinus can also bring this very rich, dark coloring that you find so useful, and it's a native plant to this part of the world. But really, most of the questions are, well, first of all, about your climate. We know it's terribly hot in the summer where you are because you're going through it right now. But how cold does the winter temperatures fall?
I would say the lowest, generally we get probably around 3 or 4 degrees, I would say. The occasional frosty morning, but very, very rarely, because it's so exposed where I am. If I go down the road, there are some gullies and stuff, and so you'll have some frosty areas in those protected gullies, but I would hardly ever see frost at my place.
Okay, so I'm trying to find who asked the question about the temperature. Anyway, but yes, that's Liz Godfrey, and because here in central Italy, where I am at the moment, we're at an altitude where we do get serious frost. So the aeoniums, I'm afraid, aren't really going to work for me. But I'm sure plenty of other people on the call will be able to do so.
Can I just make a comment? Just the fact that, is in your location, wherever you are, you need to find those plants to get that continual cascade of interest in the garden all year round. And where you are lacking a particular, there's a deficiency, maybe you need to go to artificial structure. That's, whether you get something welded up, crafted, something like that, to create that extra interest to get you through that period of the year where you struggle.
And could I, just whilst I'm looking for the next question, could I mention, you were saying about overhead watering of plants in nurseries. We find, talking to nursery owners, that there are certain plants that would do terribly well in our gardens, but we can't buy them because they can't tolerate this overhead watering in the greenhouses. So they don't get
and also what you find is you have a problem with plants growing in artificial media. The concept of them growing in artificial media means that you're actually compromising the plant before you put them in the ground.
Now, Douglas Langmead would like to know where you are in terms of coordinates.
I'm in Adelaide, South Australia.
But okay, I'm sure if he can, I'm sure he can find you on Google Earth somehow. Emma Bannister in the Balearics, it reminds us that we too can do your trick with the slender pencil pines, because our Italian cypresses are the same. Same idea. I'm skipping over anybody asking for the name of a plant because, as Angela reminds us, we have your plant list, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. Oh yes, Douglas also wants to know, do you have illumination or accent lighting for the evening?
I only got around to it this year, but it is an experience. It was such a joy when I started lighting it up. You'll have to come and check it out. It is amazing. It is just a completely different experience again. So there you go. So now I can really have an amazing garden every single day of the year because I just have to wait for nighttime and turn the lights on. Phenomenal. I was so excited. So excited.
Yeah. Now, John Power, I don't know where he is gardening, but he's asking if you're worried about fire risk.
Fire is a concern, but I'm not going to particularly consider it. I have sprinklers all around the house, and I have a swimming pool. So I have a couple of 100,000 litres of water that I always have available to do that. But what you find with a fire is such that it really is the eucalypts, the stringy barks, that the fires will go through and generate a lot of heat. And I've cleared those back away from the house. But the other thing to consider is, you know, you only live once. And it's like, why would I want to compromise the result by worrying about that? I'm just trying to create the most beautiful thing I possibly can. There is stories as far as people buy Stradivarius violins. It cost them $1 million. They could almost get the same quality if they spent $10,000, but they just want that little bit extra. I want that little bit extra. And so I'm addicted. I have to do it. I'm not, that's the thing. People have said this from time to time. And I just think, look, we're living in climate change, and I do no energy inputs, and I absorb a lot of carbon. All that grass that's collapsing, that creates habitat. That's a resource for so many insects and different things. If I go in and whippersnip all that, if I spray it all, that is defeating the whole purpose. And what it is, you can say, okay, yes, I've got some of the weed grasses could be potentially a fire hazard, but you have to give me time to evolve and get the plants in, to get the garden to get to a different stage in maybe another 5 to 10 years. I can't just go to that stage straight away. So I accept the weeds and things that are there for the time being, but I will control them further. You have to consider that bank that you saw with all those aeoniums on there. That was just a weed fest. There is not a single weed grows in that space now. I'm not saying I want none of the weed grasses or something or whatever, but I will control that over time. But people say this sometimes, and I'm saying that this person is saying that, but you have to give time to get there. You can't just go click your fingers and say it's happened. You have to give time to get plants to establish, to shade out weeds, etc., etc.
In fact, Kat Carola is asking what spontaneous or native plants have you encouraged to grow in the garden?
Not too many. There's the odd acacia and there's the odd native grass that grows. I would love them to grow more, but they're very, very hit and miss. Even though they're native and they like some really, really crappy areas, they just don't tend to sell. See, I've got seeds. I've spread it all over the place, and they'll only really grow in certain little areas. They're not, and they're too little. They're not dominant enough, so they're okay near the edges, but they're just not reliable. The weirdest thing. It's not reliable. I suspect the Phytophthora again. So it's Phytophthora cinnamomi, and so it's an introduced species, and it's right through the national park next door. And I didn't even realise, and there was actually a sign at the front of the park that was there the whole time that I never actually looked and realised, and it says Phytophthora blah 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 blah, and so it does a lot of damage in the area. And another thing again, you would say buy plants in the area. I was going to the national park next door and buying tube stock and bringing it back and trialing it in my garden. Almost all of it died. Almost all of it. So it's just amazing. I never would have thought that it was possible. You never know until you know.
Yeah. Now then, Joseph Batista is asking, do you have a windy season in Adelaide? Because
yeah, it can be windy any time of year. Where I am, I'm very exposed at the top of a hill. We get absolutely blasted with, I would say generally late autumn, early winter would probably be the worst time.
Now, Jeannie Lee, who I imagine must be in Australia, is asking how you manage the roos. It's not a problem.
I fenced them out. I fenced them out because I tried to coexist for a year and it didn't work out well. So then I had to go around and put up about a 6 foot high fence, and then I had to use a hedge to hide the fence because they want to look at the fence, not all the way around, just in some certain very prominent areas. And I've only really had maybe 2 come into the property over about the last 10 years. And generally they jump themselves out again, but so I've been very fortunate.
Oh, well, good. Well, it's not a problem I'm envious of, I must say. We have wild boar instead who dig up.
Oh, I'm sure they do some damage.
Yeah. Yes, and quite a few people are interested in the chicory and remind us that they're edible. We have wild here too. And all of the chat I'm looking at now are just saying, seeing saying just what a wonderful place you've created. One last question here. How often do you trim the pencil pines?
I would say maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Probably takes about 5 minutes for each one.
Okay. Okay. And your color, do you face any pests like the weevil, which is now killing palms and yuccas and aloes in the Costa Blanca?
No, I haven't noticed that. But that's the thing. One plant you'd be very surprised they can't grow echiums. They rot out, or there's a biological control, some kind of weevil or something, what you're just talking about. You should be the perfect environment. Like if you go maybe 10, 15 kilometers away from here, you can grow them fine. But very unfortunate, I would love to grow ginormous echiums and plenty of them. But crazy, can't grow them.
And somebody's asking if you grow anything for food, because you mentioned pears. Are they?
No, they're ornamental pears.
Okay.
Ornamental pears. No, I mean, I do have a small veggie patch, but the Phytophthora is just too problematic. I'm always experimenting and trialing occasionally bits, just to, see if I can get this to grow. But so far, no, not particularly. At earlier years ago, we had this time period when we did have a little bit of success, and then the Phytophthora kind of catches up and finds them and takes them out. So not a particularly good use of my time, unfortunately. I would love to.
And last question, asking if you have a website.
Yes, I'm on Instagram and I'm on YouTube. If you just search Kurt Wilkinson, you'll find it. And there's all sorts of bits and pieces. And if people want to DM me, I've got an interview I did with a couple of interviews I've done with Noel Kingsbury, which sort of goes more into maybe the background more. If they want some other details and things like that, that is a much more long form conversation about how the garden came to be and my past and things like that. If they
maybe
want
I can put the
have
links.
A deep dive. Well, Angela probably has the links too.
I'll put the links on the plant list.
Okay, too easy.
Yeah,
too easy.
Super.
I've got one hand up. Joseph Milius. Hi, Joseph.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. Great to see those shots. I'm in the grey north of Copenhagen at the moment, so I got very homesick seeing
right,
shots
crazy.
of SA. It was absolutely beautiful, and I've got a new appreciation for Avena fatua, I think, from seeing those dry wild oats.
Yeah,
really
right.
I had a bit of a question about the need for disturbance in the garden. You mentioned that occasionally you'll pull out a centuria if it gets a little overgrown, or
only really if it dies. Only if it dies. I mean,
okay.
Sometimes they can get very sloppy, but generally it's only when they die. And there's the thing, like I said, they'll either last 1 year or up to 5 years, and they could die any time in between. They'll just go like that because they've just rotted out. But that's the thing, like I said, it becomes an opportunity to regenerate the garden.
Yeah, sure. And given that you've fenced out the roos, do you find that there's a need for any other sort of intentional disturbance to stimulate sort of some sense of renewal in that way, or do you find that it's cyclical?
The Phytophthora is so brutal. The attrition rate is really quite high that there's always something that will turn over. What I'm trying to do, I'm constantly trying to keep a constant evolution of planting every year, so that, say, in 3 years' time, I'll have a centuria coming through. So you always got to be thinking 3 to 4 years ahead to regenerate the garden. You can't just go, okay, now I've got this area, I'm going to plant. It doesn't work like that. So you're constantly planting bits and pieces everywhere and altering the design and the landscape. And so you've always got something new coming through and regenerating the garden all the time.
Oh, so a beauty of it being
you get ahead of the curve. Get ahead of the curve.
Yes.
We get a few rabbits. We get a few rabbits, but they're not too bad. But if I had the kangaroos with the Phytophthora, without the Phytophthora, you could get away with it. With the Phytophthora, the garden is like it's on climate change on steroids. So the maximum is 48 degrees. It's like probably really having 60 degrees because the plants do not have a root system to support themselves. And so it really is an example of far more extreme conditions than you can possibly imagine.
Oh, impressive to see what you've done with it. It's yeah, it's great, very inspiring. Thanks for it.
Too easy.
Hi, Peter White. You're on mute, Peter. You need to unmute yourself. No, Peter, we can't hear you, my dear. Peter, you need to go to the bottom hand left corner and unmute yourself. You see that little microphone? There you
Yes.
go.
I thought I had unmuted myself. It struck me that as I looked at the pictures of this garden, that the landscape is so similar to our place in Andalusia. And it struck me also with a real sense of guilt almost that we'd had the Ioniums, but I'd never actually seen one with a flower on. So it's been really educational, this talk. But what I really wanted to mention, just one small point, I noticed in one photograph there was a yucca sort of tucked away amidst and behind other things. Now we found that our garden was really, or rather the yucca was very much at home in our garden, that we had one that was really reaching for the sky. You know, it was about 12 foot tall. So I wanted to ask Kurt if he had not experienced the same success with yucca, or maybe he just doesn't like yucca, or perhaps why did he not embrace this plant?
Love it. They will go, the yucca elephantiaceae will go crazy in Adelaide, but the better one, in my opinion, is filamentosa. It's a lower growing, more of a grey leaf, and it just, once you get a clump, you'll get this beautiful bract of flowers coming up multiple times a year. So it'll flower on a new shoot, and that is the one to go. That is one of my absolute favourite plants, almost bulletproof. Will grow anyway, it will gradually spread, but you just need to control it if it gets too big. But it won't grow up, it will only grow to maybe 1 to 1.5 meters high. And you'll get a flower at about 2 meters high at the top of the flower. So it's perfect. You get this architectural verticality, beautiful flower for about a week or 2 weeks. Absolutely gorgeous. Cannot recommend that plant enough.
Thank you. Willem Jan?
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Kurt, as well. What struck me most was your color schemes in the garden. They were quite unique. They were quite special in my eyes. You know, the burgundy, the rusty red with the blue and grays, a dash of yellow. Do you design those color schemes deliberately, consciously, or do they just happen?
Later, yes. Like now I would, but when I first started really doing it, it just had to. It was really just. I was struggling. Absolutely, just cannot understand how hard it was to actually get anything established. It was very demoralizing. There were times where I considered actually giving up because I'd spent probably 4 or 5 years spending all my free time, all my weekends, and the garden looked like a war zone. It was rubbish. And it was just pure ignorance that made me keep on going. Just pride and just like I couldn't have sold the place if I wanted to. It looked that bad. And so I just had to keep on going. And then I just turned the corner. That's the thing. I saw Pete Aldorf's work, and that really inspired me. It was like, wow, that is just so beautiful. And I just needed that. And that put me over. And then I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to design for myself, because before that I was too focused on trying to impress other people. And then I thought, look, I'm struggling. I'm just going to design for myself. I'm going to have fun. And it just steamrolled from there. It just kept on just building up steam. And I just fell in love. I fell in love with my garden. I just fell in love with horticulture more and just became obsessed. And then I got into photography, and then that just made me love it more. And it just kept on going and going and going. And now the light's right. I'm dashing outside. I'm taking photos. The dogs come out with me and we wander around the garden. It's a real experience.
Okay. Indy from Tender Shoots Garden Club. Where are you, Indy?
I'm in Staffordshire in the Midlands in the UK.
Ah.
So almost an identical climate.
Almost, yeah. I just wanted to say, actually, Kurt, what you mentioned earlier about climate change and the fact that you sort of just live only once. I just want to say it was quite refreshing to hear that, because quite a lot of the sort of gardening experts that we hear and listen to, they always talk about having to change your planting to find something that can cope with drought and with high heats. And I pretty much think, well, actually, just plant what you like, and if you lose it, and you just keep trying. So I was just going to say it was quite refreshing to hear what you said about that.
Can I just add something to that? It's very, very important. You need to get a return on investment. You need to carry out practices that you enjoy and that you get a reward from to keep on doing. Keep doing this process, because if you don't get a result that you enjoy, you'll just stop doing it. You'll go and do something else. You'll go play golf or something. So that's what I learned, the fact that once I started getting the return, that encouraged me to do more. And now I'm very, very focused on doing activities that give me a return. And I've just kind of gradually weeded out all the activities that don't provide a very good return. And I find people, I'll come across clients and they've had a garden designed by a designer at great cost, and they never actually fall in love with their garden. And they want to fall in love with their garden, but it's not necessarily, it's not good enough, or it's not quite what they want. And so it's sort of like they wanted to have this thing and whatever, but they never quite get the experience. I think you have to fall in love with your garden. So you need to make a garden that you can fall in love with to keep that inputs, that time and energy going into it.
Yeah. Because I think that in our climate, we talk a lot about, oh my God, the suffering, and, I think that if you let things go blonde and let things go bronze and let things, then and just let them do their own thing and not sort of try and fight the heat, fight the,
focus on more planting rather than chopping things down and cutting things out and things, unless something gets too big. So there's always a balance. There's a balance between the picture that you're trying to create, and maybe sometimes you need to clean it up a little bit. My tolerance for chaos is much higher than just about anyone. I'm going for a different thing, but it's always the balance. You've got if it's very subjective, everyone's got their own preferred approach, and it's just really just getting that perfect balance that you go, well, actually, it's a little bit too messy. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. But instead of doing a lot of maintenance, cleaning stuff out and cutting things back, why don't you come in with another plant or another group of plants or another whatever, and just keep on doing it that way? Because it depends on your client. Because if we grow in harsher clients, we get things that die and struggle in the heat. Well, then just go in again with a fresh plant. Don't stress about it too much.
Great. I think
but keep the tools on ice until winter. Or it depends on where you are. It depends on how mild your winter is.
Yeah. Well, we won't be planting in winter. We have to go in autumn because it'll just be too cold.
Absolutely. Either or that, or presumably maybe spring. Can you get away with early spring?
Well, that's
not so much.
Not according
Depends
to
on the plant.
Not according to the Mediterranean garden. You plant in winter to give them some water and get them down. I sometimes have planted in spring for sure.
Depends on the plant, doesn't it?
It depends where you are. This is also true. That it's not always the same. So I'm going to thank you. I think there's no more questions from anywhere, but lots and lots of thanks, lots and lots of compliments. A very inspiring, wonderful talk for dark February in Northern Europe, at least.
Yeah, right. Well, it's the opposite here. All good.
Thank you so much. I will send everybody the plant list and the links to other various interviews and films as well. There's films which are, I asked Kurt today to produce stills because we're not sure that we can actually broadcast films without too much time delay. So there are some good films out there which show you the garden sort of live. So I'll definitely send those through pronto. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, catch you later.
Thanks very much. See you next month, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being with us, especially my lovely Perth ladies. Ciao. Bye-bye.